Christmas Nightmare, Santa's Dark Visit. Introduction, the Eve of Joy. Christmas Eve had always been magical for our family. The snow blanketed our small town of Evergreen Falls in soft, glowing white. My family and I had spent the day decorating our cozy house, stringing lights along the edges of the roof and setting up in. I lived there with my parents, Mom and Dad, and my younger sister Emily. At 9 years old, Emily was still a firm believer in the magic of Santa Claus. I often teased her about it, though at 16, I secretly wished I still had that innocence. That night, the fireplace cracked. Act 1, A Mysterious Visitor. At F, who could be? Standing on the porch was a man in a Santa suit, but something about him was wrong. His red suit looked tattered and stained, and the fluffy white trim was yellowed. His face was hidden beneath a scraggly beard, and Mary, Dad hesitate, the man didn't. Act 2, Strange Events Unfold. Santa's real. He's here, she exclaimed, running to the window to try to spot him. The rest of us fell, around 11 p.m., probably the saint. Then came the Fremel. Act 3, A Christmas Tale Turns Dark. Emily clung to me, I do. Suddenly there was a hill. Did you hear that? Mom W, Dad Q. He. Act 4, The Monster Revealed. We decided to lock, and then we saw him. The man, he lift. Dad shouted, "Leave us alone," and lunged to close the curtains. But as he did, Santa slammed his fist against the window, cracking the glass. Act 5, The Chase Begins. We made a B. We ran upstairs, barricading ourselves in my bedroom. Dad held a bat, ready to defend us. "Stay quiet," he whispered. But Act 6, A Desperate Plan. From these years, I dropped the phone in terror. Dad decided. Mom held Emily close while I peeked through the crack in the door. I watched as Dad faced Santa at the top of the stairs. "Stay back," Dad showed. But San. Act 7, Facing the Nightmare. With no other op. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding, and found Santa dragging Dad toward the fireplace. It looked like he was trying to stuff him up the chimney. "Hey," I think Santa turned to me, his grin widening. His voice was a low growl as he said, "Naughty children get punished." I lunged. Act 8, The Christmas Morning Twist. Joyous-san. They searched Toe Chris. Inside was a note. "I'll be B. Epilogue. Ever since, and every C."
A Christmas Nightmare. Christmas Eve in our small American town is typically serene. Snow carpets the streets, lights twinkle in every window, and an overwhelming sense of peace fills the air. But last Christmas, peace was the furthest thing from what I felt. My name is Emily, and this is the story of the most terrifying night of my life. The setup. The evening began innocently enough. My parents had gone to a neighborhood Christmas party, leaving me to enjoy the holiday coziness at home. My best friend Sarah and I planned a quiet night together, exchanging gifts and watching Christmas movies. The snow fell softly outside, a pristine white blanket under the orange glow of the streetlights. My house was warm and festive. Stockings hung by the fireplace, the tree decorated to perfection, and the scent of pine and cinnamon candles wafting through the air. Sarah arrived around 7 p.m., her arms full of wrapped gifts. Her excitement was contagious, and soon we were laughing and unwrapping presents. But as the hours ticked by, an uneasy feeling began to creep into the night. Strange noises. Around 10 p.m., as we were halfway through Home Alone, a strange noise echoed from the attic. It was faint at first, like the sound of something heavy being dragged. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice low. I nodded. "It's probably just the house settling," I said, trying to convince myself more than her. But the noise didn't stop. Instead, it grew louder, like slow, deliberate footsteps above us. My stomach churned as I glanced at Sarah. "Is anyone else home?" she asked. "No," I whispered, my throat tight. Suddenly, the sound ceased, plunging the room into an eerie silence. The first encounter. We decided to ignore it, blaming our nerves on the spooky atmosphere created by the flickering firelight. But just as we tried to resume our movie, the power went out. The screen went black, and the room was M. "Hold on," I said, grabbing my phone for light. The snowstorm must have knocked out the power, I thought, but something about the timing felt off. As I moved toward the window to check the strew, "Sarah," I whisper. She joined me by the window, her gasp confirming I was. "What is that?" she murmured. The figure moved closer, its elan a descent into terror. "Call your parents." So I dialed my mom's "What about the landline?" Sarah asked. "It's downstairs," I said, my voice. The silence outside my door was oppressive. We huddled together, straining to hear any sound. The intruder footsteps, okay. "It's inside," Sarah mouthed. The footsteps grew loud. When the footsteps stopped outside, "Emily," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "The window." We rushed to the window. Few the escape. The thinnest step without the jump. I followed, adrenaline dulling the sting of the cold. The nightmare continues. We ran through the yard, slipping and stumbling in the snow. We made it to the street. Where do... the neighbor. We found a chilling revelation. We ended up hiding in their backyard shed. When dawn, finally, W. But Sarah, are the aftermath. Weeks later, S. Though the creature we saw didn't low to T. Snowfall of death. Living in a small American town nestled between the mountains had always been magical during the winter. The snow was a staple of our Christmases, blanketing everything in a serene white. But last winter, the snow wasn't magical. It was deadly. My name is Mia, and I'll never see snow the same way again. A perfect winter day. It all began on a Friday morning in mid-December. I woke up to the soft patter of snow against my window. Pulling back the curtain, I was greeted by a picturesque scene. The streets were buried under several inches of pristine snow, the trees glistening with a fresh coat of frost. "Mia, come downstairs for breakfast," Mom called. I threw on my robe and rushed down to the kitchen, where the aroma of pancakes filled the air. Dad was already by the window, sipping his coffee. "Looks like we're in for a snowstorm," he said, nodding toward the weather report on TV. The news anchor warned of heavy snowfall throughout the day and urged everyone to stay indoors. But this was nothing unusual for our town. We'd seen plenty of storms before. The first sign. By midday, the storm had intensified. The snow piled high, and the wind howled like a living thing. My best friend Jake texted me about coming over to hang out since school had been cancelled. "Sure, bring snacks," I replied. Jake arrived an hour later, bundled up like an Eskimo. The snow clung to his jacket as he stomped his boots clean on the porch. "Crazy out there," he said, shaking his head. "The roads are barely drivable." We settled into the living room, chatting and playing video games. Outside, the snow fell relentlessly, the world beyond our window fading into a white blur. Then came the scream. It was faint at first, carried by the wind, but unmistakable. Jake and I exchanged uneasy glances before rushing to the window. "Do you see anyone?" I asked, pressing my nose to the glass. Jake squinted, his face pale. "There, near the mailbox." Through the swirling snow, we saw a figure stumbling down the street. It was Mrs. Peterson, our elderly neighbor. She clutched her chest, her face twisted in terror, before collapsing face first into the snow. The horror begins. Jake and I bolted outside, ignoring the biting cold. "Mrs. Peterson," I shouted, but she didn't move. When we reached her, I froze. Her skin was a pale icy blue, her eyes wide open and glassy. The snow around her was stained with a strange black liquid, oozing from her mouth. "Is she dead?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded, too horrified to speak. The snow beneath our feet began to hiss, small tendrils of steam rising, as if the ground itself was alive. Without thinking, we grabbed Mrs. Peterson's arms and dragged her back toward my house. Trapped. By the time we reached the porch, my parents were outside, faces pale with shock. "What happened?" Mom demanded, helping us lay Mrs. Peterson down. "She just fell," I stammered. "The snow. Something's wrong with it." Dad knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. He looked up, shaking his head. "She's gone." The wind picked up, howling like a banshee. The snowflakes stung our skin like tiny needles. We hurried inside, slamming the door shut against the storm. Deadly snow. Over the next hour, the snowstorm grew more violent. Through the windows, we saw other neighbors fleeing their homes, some collapsing in the streets just like Mrs. Peterson. "What's happening out there?" Jake asked, pacing the living room. The TV news offered no answers. The anchor reported widespread chaos, warning people to stay indoors. Footage showed entire towns buried under snow, with emergency services unable to reach the affected areas. Then, the power went out. The nightmare unfolds. The house plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the swirling storm outside. Dad lit some candles while Mom tried to call for help, but her phone had no signal. Suddenly, the temperature inside the house began to drop. Our breaths fogged the air, and frost crept up the windows. "What the hell is going on?" Jake muttered, hugging himself for warmth. A loud thud echoed from the roof, followed by another. "Something's up there," I whispered. Dad grabbed a flashlight and headed for the attic. Against my better judgment, I followed him, with Jake close behind. The attic was freezing, the wooden beams groaning under the weight of the snow. Dad shone his flashlight toward the roof, and that's when we saw it. A dark, shadowy figure crouched on the beams, its glowing eyes fixed on us. The attack. Before we could react, the figure leapt down, landing with a bone-chilling screech. Its body was made of snow and ice, twisted into a grotesque, humanoid shape. Sharp icicles protruded from its limbs like claws. "Run!" Dad shouted, pushing us toward the stairs. We bolted down to the living room, slamming the attic door behind us. The creature banged against it, the wood splintering under its weight. "We need to get out of here," Jake shouted. "No," Mom said firmly. "We'll freeze out there." But staying inside wasn't an option either. The house was under siege, the temperature plummeting with every passing second. Escape into the storm. We decided to make a run for the car, hoping to drive to safety. Bundling up in whatever layers we could find, we braced ourselves for the deadly snow. The moment we stepped outside, the storm enveloped us. The wind screamed, and the snow felt alive, wrapping around our legs like icy hands. Jake and I helped Mom and Dad push through the drifts, but the snow seemed to fight back, pulling us down with every step. By the time we reached the car, Dad's hands were black with frostbite, and Mom was gasping for breath. A final stand. We piled into the car, but it wouldn't start. The snow had clogged the engine, leaving us stranded. The creature appeared in the distance, its glowing eyes cutting through the storm. It moved unnaturally fast, closing the gap between us in seconds. Dad grabbed a tire iron, stepping out to confront it. "Stay back," he shouted. But the creature didn't stop. With a single swipe of its icy claws, It knocked Dad to the ground. The end of the storm. As the creature turned its attention to us, I felt a surge of defiance. Grabbing the emergency flare from the glove compartment, I stepped out of the car. "Hey!" I screamed, igniting the flare. The creature hesitated, its icy body recoiling from the heat. I hurled the flare at it, and it erupted into flames, screeching as it melted into a pool of black sludge. The storm began to ease, the wind dying down as the snow lost its unnatural chill. The aftermath. We managed to flag down a passing plow truck the next morning. As we were taken to safety, I looked back at the town buried in snow, the bodies of our neighbors frozen in the drifts. To this day, no one knows what caused the storm, or the creature that came with it. But every winter, when the first snow falls, I can't help but feel a shiver of dread, because I know it's still out there.